always be depressing.
What do you love about running?
Energy! It can be uplifting. That human connection that we create on the broadcast every night is incredibly important.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
There has been outrage, prayer, and protests over the death of 29-year-old Tyre Nichols.
We look past George Floyd Justice and Police Act that Congress has to re-engage.
Well, we're going to meet this Wednesday. I want to find a reasonable and a responsible way that we can lift the debt ceiling but take control of this runaway spending.
I don't know how congressional oversight on the documents, actually knowing what they are, in any way impedes an investigation.
You're going to see bipartisan, bicameral support to force Attorney General Garland to make these documents available to Congress.
That's why I'm running to replace Josh Hawley.
Welcome to Red and Blue. I'm Nicole Killian in Washington. Thanks for joining us. Lawmakers are facing renewed calls for police reform following the death of Tyre Nichols. A sixth Memphis police officer was suspended today. 5 former officers are facing murder charges. Police reform talks between Democratic Senator Cory Booker and Republican Senator Tim Scott broke down after months of negotiations in the fall of 2021. No meetings are currently scheduled between the two to discuss. Booker, however, is expected to introduce police reform legislation in the next couple of weeks, according to an individual familiar with his plans. For more on this now, I want to turn to Scott MacFarlane, my colleague on Capitol Hill, and Ed O'Keefe, who is our senior White House and political correspondent. Ed, so good to see you. I know you just spoke with President Biden. Let's play a little bit of that exchange, and we'll talk to you on the other side.
Do you have any plans to meet with the Congressional Black Caucus on police reform? They're asking for a meeting.
Oh, yeah, no, of course I will. Of course, I haven't set the time yet.
Do you still think George Floyd Act is the most reasonable legislation to get through a divided Congress?
I think we should do it right now.
All right, Ed, so you had that exchange with the president on police reform. What is his engagement going to be on this issue?
We've been hearing during the day today that there might be more to say on this, and so we just took it straight to the boss. And as you saw there, he generally committed to meeting with them about this issue. Whether a meeting is actually scheduled yet, we haven't heard. But remember, this is an issue he has been talking about since he was a candidate, certainly as president, backed the bipartisan talks that went on, and supported the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, saying, as you saw there again today, that they should take it up and pass it as originally written. Whether or not that can happen in a divided Congress, which is why I asked, is that the most reasonable piece of legislation that could get through right now, remains to be seen. But undoubtedly, this is an issue that he will focus on and try to raise in the coming days when he meets with Speaker McCarthy, perhaps, also at the State of the Union next Tuesday night when he lays out his agenda for the coming year. We should also point out, Nicole, that there are now plans to send at least 4 administration officials to the funeral for Tyre Nichols on Wednesday in Memphis. Keisha Lance Bottoms, who's the head of what's called the Office of Public Engagement, will lead that delegation. She's the former mayor of Atlanta and has been a senior aide to the president now for the past year. Mitch Landrieu, former mayor of New Orleans, somebody who has spoken out quite frequently on civil rights issues and how heads the Infrastructure Coordination Office. He'll be on that trip. And then 2 other officials, Tara Murray, who's a special assistant in the Office of Public Engagement, and Erica Lowe, who's head of African-American media here at the White House. So a sign that they are obviously keeping focused on this issue during the week. President can't go, of course, because he has his meeting with the Speaker on Wednesday, but telling that they're willing to send a handful of officials, at least in his absence.
And Scott, I want to turn back to you because as we heard there in that exchange with Ed, of course, the president calling on Congress to act, which he has done before. But realistically, what are the chances this Congress takes up police reform?
Yeah, they couldn't make the equation work 2 years ago or last year after George Floyd's death. And the political formula has only become more complicated with Congress now divided. This Monday evening this new Senate week began with Dick Durbin saying he's bringing the four players in the Senate back together for talks. The two Republicans from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott, Cory Booker and Durbin himself. But Durbin said something particularly striking on the Senate floor Monday evening. He said what they were talking about in terms of reforms, trying to reduce or ban chokeholds, trying to maybe cut federal funding for some police departments who don't initiate change. He said it was both really close to happening, but also not nearly enough. And that's not the type of language that is really a bridge towards a new solution. If you're both minimizing what you talked about before, but also saying you couldn't put the coalition together to get it done.
And of course, we know another big issue and a big talker on Capitol Hill is this issue of the debt limit and raising the debt ceiling. As Ed alluded to, we know that House Speaker Kevin McCarthy will be meeting with President Biden later this week. Let's take a listen to what he told our Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation about that sit down that he anticipates.
Well, we're going to meet this Wednesday. I know the president said he didn't want to have any discussions, but I think it's very important that our whole government is designed to find compromise. I want to find a reasonable and a responsible way that we can lift the debt ceiling but take control of this runaway spending.
So he says he wants this to be reasonable, but what more do we know about the offer that the speaker wants to put on the table?
We know they're going to have a conversation Wednesday. It's just far from clear they're speaking the same language. I mean, the White House has not yielded, and it's been unequivocal that they're not going to negotiate over the debt ceiling, characterizing it as too dangerous. Kevin McCarthy spoke about spending cuts he says need to be enacted. We've talked to members of the Freedom Caucus over the past week. You and I both have. I'll go back to what Andy Harris said of Maryland, that there are not Republican votes, not even close, for a clean debt ceiling increase. So some coalition, some cobbling together of Democratic votes and Republican votes would be needed for the president to get his way on this. So I'm not sure the trajectory of this conversation Wednesday.
And then, Ed, going back to you, I mean, obviously the White House for weeks now, it seems, has said that they don't intend to negotiate. So what has changed here in terms of the president sitting down with Speaker McCarthy this week?
I mean, nothing has changed publicly, at least in their calculations on this. When he was asked, when he got back here a little while ago, as he worked the rope line of reporters, what would your message be or what's your plan for your meeting with Speaker McCarthy? All he kept saying over and over again was, show me your budget, I'll show you mine. Which is to say, if you are serious about talking about potential cuts, show us where you'd make them. When we know many Republicans who said don't touch Social Security and Medicare, and he effectively said that yesterday. And when both Democrats and Republicans are on record saying you can't go after the spending of the Defense Department and general defense matters because that could put national security at risk. And there again, the speaker said, yeah, you're probably right. Let's just make sure it's more efficient and effective. So what else is there? And I think that's what the White House is looking to see him signal in that meeting with the president. But remember, this isn't just considered over here, at least, as a meeting about the debt limit. It's arguably a better get-to-know-you conversation for two guys who've been in rooms together but have never really had to engage directly as the two principals in a negotiation. And based on recent events across the country, this White House at least would argue there are more than just the debt limit worth discussing with the head of the Republican conference. Perhaps it's police reform. Perhaps it's the ongoing military operations in aid to Ukraine. Perhaps it's somewhere else that the White House and Republicans can find bipartisan agreement to work on something. And so expect that this will be a meeting that, you know, allows them to do that. We'll see who else is in the room, and we'll see how long it goes. But these two need to get to know each other better and need to find a way forward, since especially even Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has signaled the first two people who need to talk about the debt limit are these guys, and nothing else happens until they do.
All right. Well, we'll see where things go after this. Appreciate it very much. Ed O'Keefe joining us from the White House. And my congressional colleague, Scott McFarland, thanks for being here. New CBS News polling shows most Americans believe President Biden is trying to cooperate with investigations into classified materials discovered in his possession. His approval rating also remains unchanged. 44% of Americans support his job performance and 56% do not. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us from New York to break it all down. Good to see you, Anthony. And so tell us a little bit more about this poll. Why haven't the classified documents changed anything?
Great to talk to you. Okay, so there's those numbers you showed at the top, identical from a few weeks ago. And let me start with that point you raised, Nicole, about people feeling like the Biden administration has cooperated with the investigation, 61% saying they feel that he has. Now, I'll emphasize this. They do feel an investigation is warranted, but sometimes it seems how people perceive you dealing with it is what makes the difference. And then there's this other part, which is a little bit of context. For all that we've heard, now we've got the Biden documents. We, of course, know about former President Donald Trump and the discovery of documents at his house, and, of course, the reports about former Vice President Mike Pence. So we asked people, okay, does ex-high-ranking officials having classified documents at their home happen? How much? How much do you think? And it's a little bit of conjecture, rightly or wrongly, but 40% think this happens a lot. 45% think it happens sometimes. So you got 85% think this might be kind of commonplace. And that sets a little bit of context, maybe informs a little bit of that, why the numbers haven't moved for Joe Biden, Nicole.
Yeah, and interestingly, you compare this to views about former President Trump. What's different here?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is on that cooperation front. You see differences, that number who feel Biden has, but it's almost the reverse, who feel that President Trump did not cooperate with his. But I do want to point out this comparison in the minds, especially of Republicans. Their rank and file feel that the investigations have been now more fair to the current president, Joe Biden, than they were to Donald Trump, at 69% among Republicans, citing what they perceive as that unfairness. Democrats feeling that the two have been treated at least equally fair or unfair. So that's something that stands out for Republicans when we start doing those comparisons. And I suspect we'll see more of that infused into the political discourse going forward, Nicole.
All right, Anthony Salvanto, thanks so much. Former President Donald Trump makes his first campaign stops of the 2024 presidential cycle. What it means for the rest of the field of GOP hopefuls from one of Mike Pence's top advisors. That's next. You're streaming Red and Blue, reporting across the political divide.
Original documentary from CBS reports tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely. As Taiwan faces threats and aggression.
Taiwan is on the front line, and we understand our responsibility as a democracy. We cannot fall.
CBS News examines whether they can defend themselves.
Putin, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, there are manifestations of the battle between autocracy and democracy. And that is a fight that we're all engaged in.
Defending Taiwan, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme.
States from the plains to the northeast are bracing for more than 2 feet of heavy snow.
Every second counts.
This is a monster winter storm.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
There's a wrinkle in the forecast, the accumulating ice.
You'll have time to get prepared.
Take precautions before you head out.
Feel the forecast on the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Not one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
People are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether.
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Nicole Killian. Former Vice President Mike Pence spoke publicly for the first time since documents marked classified were found in his Indiana home. Pence says he's told his counsel to cooperate with the DOJ, the National Archives, and Congress.
Now, while I was not aware that those classified documents were in our personal residence, let me be clear. Those classified documents should not have been in my personal residence. Mistakes were made, and I take full responsibility.
For more, Mark Short joins us now. He was previously the chief of staff for former Vice President Mike Pence and the director of legislative affairs for former President Trump. He is currently Mr. Pence's senior advisor. Thank you so much for joining us. And I really want to just start there with what the former vice president just said. Mistakes were made. Of course, we went through all of your titles. You're his senior advisor. What went wrong here?
Well, Nicole, I think as you heard the vice president take responsibility of the fact that there were documents at his home. We're still looking into how that happened. But I think that,
I mean, how did it happen?
Well, there's a couple of things. It's our mistake because we did look through all the West Wing documents. I think these were documents that came from the personal residence. But in that process, I think that there's a reality that, unfortunately, much of the packing happened after January 6th, as you know. Much of the residence was still as it was on the 6th. And so with about 10 days to go, probably things were done in a more hurried fashion, even though we thought we had a safe process to make sure that documents were returned appropriately. But we take responsibility, as you heard the vice president say, fully cooperated. I do have some concerns. I do think there's a double standard with the way DOJ has operated when it comes to Republicans and Democrats in this situation. You know, when we contacted the archives to self-disclose this, the archives explained the process of sending a team out to the vice president's residence to collect the materials and bring them back to D.C. And they look through them and determine if anything is still classified. And if it is, they turn it over to DOJ. That's the process. That's the process they followed for President Biden. But in our case, that very same day, DOJ decided they wanted to come to the vice president's home in the middle of the night when he was here for the March for Life rally to collect the material. So,
I mean, what do you make of that?
It does seem like there's a double standard, and I think you'd have to ask DOJ what to make of that. But we're fully cooperating with any congressional or other investigation, and as you said, all the materials have been returned.
I mean, besides that, has the Department of Justice reached out to you or the former vice president beyond that particular episode, and have you gotten any indication as to whether or not they might appoint a special counsel?
We've heard nothing about a potential special counsel.
And what more can you tell us about some of the documents that were found?
Well, we can't, because the process is that if you see that there's markings on them, you put them aside and they're put in a safe. And that's what counsel the vice president did. Because our security clearances have evaporated at this point, I should say, they've run out. And so what happens is that they take back possession of the archives, and they're the ones that determine things still classified. And then they let us know. We have not heard at this point whether or not those documents are at this point outdated or presumably potentially still classified.
I want to switch subjects now and turn to 2024. I know you probably get a lot of questions about this all the time, but you know, the former vice president did say last week that he is still considering potentially throwing his hat into the presidential ring. We know he has a number of events scheduled in the upcoming weeks in places like Washington, Texas, South Carolina. When will he make a decision?
Well, I think he's getting a lot of encouragement as he travels the country to do this, and I think he's continuing to listen to folks who are encouraging that direction. I think that there's not really a timetable that says you must get in at a certain point. I think he has the ability to wait longer because certainly people are well familiar with his record and his name. It's not the same. Some candidates, I think, need to build name ID and get in at an earlier point. I do think the field is somewhat, you know, it's impacted by a former president deciding to run again. I think that keeps things a little bit frozen.
Has he spoken to the former president about whether he may potentially run?
They haven't had that conversation.
I mean, will he reach out before he makes a decision one way or the other?
Let's let him and his family make a decision first before figuring out who they need to reach out to.
Obviously, we know one big issue kind of overshadowing everything is the debt ceiling right now. And so how do you think your party is handling that? I know you were in charge of legislative affairs, but in terms of this posture by Republicans that there must be spending cuts in order to agree to a debt limit, do you agree with that posture, or should there just be a straight, clean vote?
I think it's totally appropriate to have legislation attached to a debt ceiling. I think they're totally appropriate. And I think it's time for America to have a real conversation about spending. We're at $32 trillion in debt. For the first time since World War II, we've reached the point that our debt to GDP is over 100%. Both parties should be having this conversation. I guess some of my concern is that the reality is most of our budget, up to close to 70%, is now mandatory spending. And everybody said, we're not going to touch any of that. So we're going to say over this 30% of the pie, we're going to fight about 2%, which is roughly 0.06% of our federal budget. And so I feel that both sides aren't really talking about the trajectory that we're on that's driving us over a fiscal cliff. And so I think it's appropriate for Republicans to discuss the spending. It's appropriate, in fact, to have legislation tied to a debt ceiling. But we're not really addressing the real causes that are driving our spending, which are the mandatory spending programs.
I mean, given the dynamics in this Congress and with the administration, where do you put the chances at for default?
Well, I don't think there'll be default. I do think that Republicans have tried this path a couple times in 2011, 2013 without success. And so I think it's going to be challenging.
But in 2011, I mean, we were right on the brink.
Yeah, sure. But I think it's also extra challenging if Republicans in the House and the Senate are not on the same page. And so I do think it's important that Speaker McCarthy have backup from Senate Republicans, and they need to be on the same page, too, to make sure there's a united front in this debate.
All right. Well, Mark Short, thanks so much always for stopping in and stopping by, and we hope you join us again.
Thanks for having me, Nicole.
Sure. Coming up on Red and Blue, Republican Josh Hawley is defending his Missouri Senate seat in 2024. Democrat Lucas Kunce is challenging him by putting Hawley's role on January 6, 2020 at the center of his campaign announcement. We will talk to him about his race next. You're streaming Red and Blue.
Original CBS Reports documentary.
Yoga and wellness has become a place of anti-science.
Online clickbait.
The algorithms feed you content based upon your own fantasy.
Potentially at my peril.
There's no question about it.
Spreading digital disinformation.
Their entire yoga studio and spiritual community got so embedded in all of the QAnon stuff that it became this sick place.
Why pro-health people are fertile ground for anti-science messages.
We can just go into the whole mask thing. A lot of us just believe that's symbolism for silencing people.
People are locked in this mindset. They've been taught to accept what the medical doctors say.
No longer are you going to be willing to take any medical advice.
It's a big problem that we urgently need to address.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
We need to put an end to this territorial status.
Will statehood create a better Puerto Rico?
So that we have the same quality of life that you see in the States.
What do you worry about?
Me living here in the future?
They're giving incentives to non-Puerto Ricans to come to Puerto Rico
and extract our natural resources and take over our land.
Vacation in Puerto Rico, and in exchange for that, you don't pay taxes.
Why would I allow somebody who abused me for 123 years to then consume me?
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
After decades in the public eye and public service, this mother-daughter duo is now talking about gutsy women. What's the gutsiest thing you've ever done? We go person to person with Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton and Chelsea Clinton.
Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Nicole Killian. The 2024 Missouri Senate race is already heating up, with former Marine veteran Lucas Kunce announcing that he will challenge Republican Senator Josh Hawley. The Democrat announced his bid for Senate on the 2-year anniversary of the January 6th Capitol riots. In his ad campaign, Kunce directly calls out Hawley over his actions during the insurrection.
That's our current U.S. Senator Josh Hawley. This guy. Or maybe you'd better recognize him running for his life a few hours later. I swear, this coward's always running from something. And now, this is the guy who's writing a book telling every single one of us how to be a man. Now this is me, Lucas Kunce, running for Senate.
And Missouri U.S. Senate Democratic candidate Lucas Kunce joins me now. Thank you so much for being with us. And I really want to start with how you launched your campaign at the beginning of this month. Why did you decide to do it on the 2nd anniversary of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol?
You know, Missourians really just want to have power back for themselves, and they're tired of politicians like Josh Hawley running off and only doing things for power for themselves. And so, you know, that's why we launched on January 6th, because it's the day he showed that all he cares about is power for himself, right? The second that he thinks it's going to get him some power, he's out there pumping his fist, inciting a crowd. And then, you know, the second things get real, he's skittering out the back door. And, you know, as a Marine who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, if any of us had shown that type of cowardice over there, we'd have been court-martialed. And so for me, I think it's time that here in Missouri, we had someone who knows how to stand up and fight, who will stand up for the folks of this state and not just run away any chance they get.
Last year, you ran and lost in the Missouri Democratic Senate primary. What did you learn from that loss that will change how you run this time around?
No, I learned how hard it is for an everyday person to get elected in this country. I came in, you know, I've got no family connections. Josh Hawley's dad's, you know, president of a bank. He had a former senator trying to get him to run and everything like that. I have none of that. I have no personal wealth. When my mom got cancer, she moved in with me. My sisters lived with me in the past. Like, I come from a family of regular Missourians who lived paycheck to paycheck in one disaster from bankruptcy. We actually went bankrupt when I was a kid for medical bills. And so for me, what I learned is that, like, without connections and without a lot of family wealth, it's really hard to get elected. But I also learned that what everyday people want is someone who understands how they live, who understands what it's like to be paycheck to paycheck, who has a history of service. I did 13 years in the Marine Corps, actually to pay back the neighborhood that took care of me when our family went bankrupt. And so, you know, one thing we had to figure out was how to raise money. By the end of that campaign, we had a record-breaking grassroots fundraising movement, and we've taken that movement into this new campaign. We raised more in the first week than any statewide campaign in Missouri history ever has. I'm really excited that we're going to be able to continue that all the way through November.
I guess what makes you so confident, though, that, you know, you can potentially win this time around or have a more successful bid, since this is already a very difficult map for Democrats in the Senate come 2024?
You know, I mentioned how Missourians are trying to get power for themselves back. You know, one of the things that I'm running on, the thing basically, is fundamentally changing who has power in this country, getting power back for everyday people. And that's actually what we've been doing in Missouri, and a lot of people on the coast are surprised at the way that we have been taking care of ourselves against folks like Josh Hawley. So when I say that, I mean on ballot measures, you know, we expanded Medicaid, we increased the minimum wage $5 over the federal level, we passed recreational marijuana. We're the only state in the entire country to overturn the anti-union right to work, and we did it 68% to 32%. We are a state where people have very strong populist roots and want to have power back. That's what I'm running for. Josh Hawley was against every single one of those things that I just mentioned, and we're going to run on that every single day.
And aside from that populist vision that you cited, I mean, what is your path to victory, especially in such a conservative state?
Yeah, well, you know, people are tired of their folks trying to control their lives. And so, you know, what Josh Hawley is about is he's all about control. He's all about himself, right? I mean, he wants to control you in the bedroom. He wants to control you in the doctor's office. He wants to control you at the workplace. I mean, the guy is putting out a book called Manhood, trying to control what it means to be a man. He says that everyone has to be made in his own image to really be a man. Like, that's creepy, that's gross, it's weird. He's a fraud and a coward. And by the time I'm done with him, every single person in Missouri and probably across the country is going to know that. And so people in Missouri, when they feel like someone doesn't stand for them, they will vote against them no matter which party. Our reddest year was 2016 when Donald Trump won the state by 17 points. That very same year, a veteran like me, his name was Jason Kander, ran for U.S. Senate against a long-term incumbent named Roy Blunt. And all he ran on was the fact that Roy Blunt's wife and his 3 kids were corporate lobbyists. Jason came within three points of winning, right? He closed more than a 14-point gap. We don't have to close a 14-point gap anymore. And Josh Hawley is way worse than Roy Blunt ever was.
And then just very briefly, yes or no, obviously Senator Hawley has put out a lot of legislation. Most recently, he put forth a bill last week that would ban lawmakers from trading stocks. Just a quick yes or no, do you agree that members of Congress and their spouses should be banned from trading stocks?
You know, he lets them have blind trusts, which is a scam. That should be thrown out, too.
So yes or no?
They shouldn't have stocks at all, not even in a blind trust. I'm tired of them making decisions based on their portfolios rather than their constituents.
All right. Lucas Kunce, thanks so much. We hope to have you back again. Appreciate you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of the program, you can see them anytime on the CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/redandblue.
Everybody wakes up in the morning and they are pelted with alerts that frighten them, news that agitates them. With this